Hostel, an Overseas Famous event where we will be here once a month discussing community and discussing the career and discussing the things that you're going to need as an overseas athlete, whether playing presently or playing in the future. We feel that this is a very important thing just because community is so big. I know when I look at the community of overseas basketball, a lot of it is on social media. So people follow each other and gain access to each other's information, but it's social media. So the community is more of a face-to-face, let's talk it out, let's discuss, here's some ideas, here's some people that will be able to help you, as opposed to just writing 4 fires when someone, on someone else's highlight, which is something I see a lot in the overseas community. Just people writing things, just be like fire, and be like, do you talk to this person, or you just kind of, that's your relationship, is you just write little posts on their highlights. So I want this to be more of a community because I know relationships are so big once you are post-career and even in career. It's who you know. Once you get out of this business, once you retire, those relationships are going to carry on into your second life, as I call it, because your first life was being a basketball player or an overseas athlete, volleyball player, or soccer player. Once that ends, you start your second life, and that second life is going to take you for a lot more years than your first life took you. So that is why we're building this, to build this community for guys and girls to come together and discuss and listen to some really great speakers. And we have the first great speaker, Dr. Cheryl Robinson. Now, Dr. Robinson has helped me tremendously in my pivot, which is she's going to be talking about today, is the pivot from being a professional athlete to taking on a whole entire new life. Dr. Cheryl works with a lot more people. She is a contributor at Forbes, also founder of Ready to Roar. And it's so funny when I get nervous when I say certain things. I did this song one time, like Katy Perry, but I for some reason, brings me back to little kid with my R's. Yeah. So Ready to Roar. Dr. Cheryl Robinson, the founder of that, and also contributor at Forbes, here to talk to us about pivoting within your career, which is what overseas athletes need to do upon retirement. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am so excited for you because I talk about pivoting every single day. That's my expertise. And what better to talk about pivoting than with overseas athletes, right? You pivot all the time. So thank you for having me.
No, you're totally right. I think the overseas athlete really has to pivot more so than any other athlete. I was talking to a guy
100%.
Yeah, and it's like you're jumping, because you're not just jumping. Guys in the NBA, they're staying on the same team. It's weird when guys change teams, but you stay in the same city, same house, same things, same practice, same coaches. Overseas, it's a different thing every single year. So it's so much more challenging to pivot on top of just pivoting careers.
Yeah, even in other sports, even if you do pivot or transition to another team, you're still amongst your same colleagues. You're still playing with the same people that you've been playing with for so long. And overseas, just from your book alone, you learn that you are with different players, sometimes 6 months at a time. It doesn't, you're not even there for a full year. So you really have to learn how to adjust and adapt quickly in order to be able to play with them. So, all right, let's get right into it.
Let's get into it. Let's do it.
All right. Let me just give a little bit of background on me and how I'm qualified to talk to you about pivoting. So I have 15 years of experience in sports entertainment. I started a couple of businesses, but I've always wanted to be a writer. And a couple of years ago, I decided to focus on my writing. And that's where I met my former editor at Forbes Women. We were talking about what would my column be about. And I said, I'm really good at failing forward. When A doesn't work, I go to B, C, D, and I just keep going. And I think in my career right now, I'm on triple Z. So she said, I love I love it, but it has to be more positive. So it made me reflect, well, what does failing forward actually mean? It actually means pivoting, right? Like the true definition of pivoting is to go from point A to point B to point C, etc. And especially if you play basketball, you pivot a lot, especially during the game. So I was on this journey with my column at Forbes Women all about pivoting. And I interviewed women, and I still interview women who have successfully pivoted in their career. But during that time, I was also in my doctorate program. And I said, let me use this dissertation to my benefit. And I was able to do my dissertation on the art of pivoting. So then I started to be able to interview men as well of how they pivoted. So now I have all this data. I love talking about it. And pivoting, what people don't understand is that you pivot at least 100 times a day, because pivoting covers your mindset, it covers your career, and it covers your personal life. And within all three, you are constantly pivoting, and the mindset, especially during the day. For athletes, specifically international athletes, overseas athletes, you are pivoting, as we talked about before, way more than the average athlete. And it is going from different cities to play, going to the different countries to play, different teams, learning the different languages as much as you can. And it's so critical, one, to recognize that you are in a pivot. That's where everyone gets hung up. They think, oh, this is such a negative experience. Oh, I have to retire this year. Oh, they're forcing me to retire, or I have to go to a different city. And when you start to think of it negatively, that's where things start to go south. But if you can recognize that you're in a pivot and there is a way to successfully get to where you want to go, that's when things start to happen for you, or happen quicker than if you were in that negative mindset that's holding you back. So there's three core themes to pivoting. And this comes from, I have interviewed over 400 people about pivoting. So I've taken all that research, I've identified those core themes, and here they are. Here's what everyone has expressed when I talk to them. The first one to successfully pivot is self-confidence. And as athletes, you might be top of your game in one country. Then you go over to another country and maybe you're not top of your game. And that starts to mess with you mentally. Would you agree, Kevin? Has that ever happened to you before?
It is very common. I know, because the style of play changes. So you might be a player that plays with a certain style, and that style is not conducive to your new environment. And then you start second guessing and questioning yourself and
Mm-hmm.
questioning whether you deserve to be in this contract. I think that's something that overseas athletes definitely deal with.
Yeah. So with the self-confidence, it's about relying on your reputation, believing in yourself that, hey, I've been playing now for 15 years. I'm good at what I do. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't good. So to have that self-confidence, it does take that constant reassuring, but it can't come from the outside. It has to come from the inside. Because when you know that you deserve to be there, it's going to be a lot better. Okay, maybe I'm number two on this team right now, but I will get to number one quicker.
Mhm.
When you really can start to believe in yourself. So all of these people have said they really worked on building their self-confidence enough. And maybe it's even, hey, I don't want to be on this team anymore. I want to go play somewhere else. And it's about saying, this is what I'm good at. This is why I deserve the contract, or at least a tryout, and let me do it so I can get to where I want to go. So that's number one. Was that clear enough
Yeah,
about
I
building
think
a self-confidence?
no, I definitely think, because some guys are overly confident, some girls are overly confident, and some are just the right amount of confidence they need to be successful. And I always say, as an athlete, like you kind of talked about, having that self confidence, knowing what you're worth. It's so important, because your career is such a short block, and I feel like I
Yeah.
was always such a nice person. I was like, well, my agent got me this, my agent got me this. Like there could be something else out there. There could be different agents. And I wasn't always looking out for my best interest. I was always kind of like, well, we'll see if this happens and I'll just wait
Hmm.
and see. I trust this person. And you kind of have to realize what you're worth because you have such a short window. And once that window's up, you can't go back. And I sit here in my office right now, wishing a lot of times that I could go back and be still playing. So I definitely agree that the self-confidence is wildly important.
Yeah. And I hope that you can get the players who are about to go overseas to come talk to you, join your community, because you can develop that self-confidence now
Yeah.
before you go over there. That's going to make such a difference even while you're playing and the type of contracts you receive. I would say to retired athletes or who are about to retire, yes, this is all you've known for what, past 15, 20, 25 years, right? It could
Yeah.
be up to. You also have to understand that that translates or correlates to the business world. Your skills that you had on that court, you have to now use to your advantage off the court. And a lot of times people think, well, this is all that I've known. How does it translate? Build that self confidence. When you apply for a job, it is, hey, I was a team captain in 3 different countries. I had to deal with people who spoke 10 different languages on a team, and a team of what, 15 guys.
Hmm.
And here is how I led the team. Here were the championships I've won. You go in with that self confidence. It doesn't matter if you know 100% the skills needed for that job, but just from that, they know you can adapt quickly. You can learn quickly. And most companies want to invest in the person and then teach them the skills later. So that's where that self-confidence comes from.
I definitely can hear that because I went through job interviews and things like that. And people tell you like your skills can transition. But the way you describe it as having that self-confidence being like, listen, we all know your skills can transition, but you need to go in there like letting them know, hey, like listen, this and
Right.
the speaking to multiple languages is such an underrated skill, and being able to communicate with people of all different backgrounds and all different, everything. It's wild.
Yep. Yep. And leadership, it all comes down to communication. And being an overseas athlete, you are the best type of communicator because, and again, just from Kevin's book, it's the owners are going to speak a different language. The scouts are going to speak a different language. Your agent is going to speak a different language. Your teammates, your roommates, everyone speaks a different language. So it's how can you communicate? And that translates over to leadership because companies understand you know how to lead, you know how to communicate. That is one of the biggest barriers in leadership. So build up that self-confidence, stick out your chest and say, here is why I deserve the job because I did X, Y, and Z overseas. And they are going to respect you for that. They are going to want you on their team. So that's number one, self-confidence. Number two is risk taking. If you don't take that risk, you don't succeed. And even if you fail, I really don't like that word because it's more lessons learned. But the quicker you learn a lesson, the quicker you're going to succeed. And the people who remain stagnant or get into that negative mindset are the people who don't take a risk. And with everyone that I've interviewed, they've all said the risk of not doing it was greater than any like negative consequence of risking. So when you retire or come back, again, believe that you have the skills needed to succeed at a company or starting your own business, and then take that risk. It's the calculated risk. Just don't jump 2 feet in with zero research. Do your research, come up with a plan, come up with a strategy, and then just do it. Don't talk yourself out of it. The longer you're talking to yourself, the more likely you're not going to take that risk. And it's all about just going for it, starting it, start the momentum.
It's funny because we talked a little bit about this just before we hopped on.
Yeah.
about taking that risk, even with something like this, where it's such a resource that no athlete, like nothing is provided. We talked about this in nauseam, how you go to the NBA and the G League and all of these places, and there's some sort of orientation for you, and there's experts brought in, there's people who are telling you different things, and we don't have that as overseas athletes. You just kind of show up to a country and hop in, they throw a uniform on you, throw you on the court, and it's just like, there's our new import, and everyone cheers. But like there's no preparation and everything like that. And even with this, like risk taking is so important, because this thing that we're building right now, this community discussions and experts, it's something that you don't know who's going to be interested in this. You don't know if people are going to be like, oh, I don't really care. Like I told, when I sent an email out of people I'm going to send this to, once we're finished, I sent an email and I said, like, listen, you guys have to understand that everything, people have always said, like, it's going to crash down quickly. But while you should have that confidence to be like, I'm the best player right now and I don't need to worry about everything, the ability to build your brand as an overseas athlete is so important, because if once that you're back in America, no one cares anymore. Like it's so funny when you look, even like my followers that follow me, a ton of them are like overseas, just random people who live in other countries, or fans of the wrestler Kevin Owens. But like those are like the majority of my followers. So a lot of them are just overseas people who don't give a shit about me. And it doesn't matter if I have 7,000, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 followers. If they're all overseas, they're not going to help me when I return home.
Yep.
So just taking that risk of just doing something like this and being like, this is important. I believe in it. I don't really care if people are going to be like, just delete it when I send the email, but I want this to be out there and I want to help this people. And I think this is something that's really important. So risk taking is so important.
And I think it's scary as an athlete. Now, I've never been an overseas athlete. I think the furthest I've got was high school soccer, but I've worked in intercollegiate athletics, and then I've worked in professional sports with athletes. And the ones who truly make it understand that they are a brand, and they start setting themselves up before they retire, because they know eventually they're going to be retired, whether or not they're forced into retirement because of an injury or a trade, or they just retire on their own. They know it's coming. The ones who just don't want to think about it and put it to the side, who are scared, those are the ones that are going to struggle after retirement. So that's why this community is so important, especially if you're a current player. And if you're a retired player, bravo for taking the first steps to joining the community, to understand, okay, here's where I've been at, but here's where I want to be, and let's make that change. So everything is a risk in life, no matter what you do. But if you have the self-confidence, you have that strategy, the risk is so much greater than just sitting back and saying, I can't deal with this. So number 3, the third biggest core theme, and what I wholeheartedly believe in, is networking. It is who you know. And it's not about the quantity of your network, it's about the quality of your network. And it's about developing those relationships. It takes longer to develop a relationship, but the reward is greater. Because when you get to know that person and then you say, hey, can you do this for me? They want to do it as a friend. Versus if Kevin and I just met and I said, hey, I like your book, I like what you're doing, and I give him this 2-sentence, pat on the back, and then say, hey, can you do this for me? Most likely he's not going to do it. He doesn't know who I am, and he wants to keep his reputation intact. So as you're overseas, right? So let's talk about the current players first. Mm-hmm. Network with as many people as you can. Keep those connections open, because there's a thing called the golden connector. And the golden connector has one strong contact in every industry. And what that means is, and I use the fashion industry as an example, if I need to get someone in that fashion industry and I have that one strong connection, okay, I may not know the person directly, but they will, or they will know who to direct me to. And if I have a relationship with them versus just a business card, then they will connect me and they can vouch for me. And that's why overseas, maintaining those positive relationships are going to help you. If you want to start a business, you don't know, maybe in the UK or Taiwan or somewhere, right? Wherever you are, you can utilize their expertise to help you build that business or to help you get that job. That's for current. As for retired, if coming to these types of events is going to help you build out your network. And even if you haven't spoken to someone in a year, say from Australia, reach out to them. Hey, how are you? Here's an update. Here's what I'm doing. Can we have a virtual coffee? I can't tell you how many virtual coffees I go on, but that's how you develop friendships. And then those friendships lead to leads, then that gets you to where you want to go. And networking is huge. It's about the quality. If you say, hey, I know this person, can you pick up that phone? And will they answer or call you back? If they won't, if you don't know, that's not a real connection. But if you know that they will, that's the quality of your network.
It's so funny. I just think about, I always put myself, because I was like that less confident human being. And I always think about myself as when I, even like as like a more of an introvert, which is weird because I wrote a book and like do all these things, but like it's still when you get a meeting or something with someone you've never met before, I always get like anxiety. I'm just like, oh my gosh, even if it's a virtual meeting, I'm just like, oh, what am I going to talk? What if I'm, and it's so weird. It's such a weird thought, because when I just decided, like you talked about, like take that risk, take that chance, and just jumped at those opportunities, I met so many people. I mean, I met you, who helped tremendously, with the book and everything. It's like Don and all of these different people that I've really reached out to, that now I have this network of connections that I didn't even have 6 months ago, just from going and starting this business and saying, I want athletes to have a better life than I did. So I almost had to go through the whole entire, the gauntlet that they're going to be facing, and it really does work. Like that networking, it really does work when I start talking to some of these athletes and some of these just random people. You really find out so much, and you're really able to make those connections. And I really have seen that golden connection, because there's people that I've talked to and been like, oh wow, I know this guy who could help you with this. And I'm like, I can't believe that, that's the relationship that we just jumped to, just based on me just reaching out and meeting you for,
Yeah.
a 20-minute conversation, a 20-minute sit down virtual coffee. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And, pivoting, successfully pivoting doesn't happen overnight, right? Just like any success, it looks like it does, but there are many years or months leading up to that. And don't be hard on yourself. Know that you are in the process. And as long as you do something once a day, at least to better yourself, you are still keeping that momentum going. And that's what a lot of people think. Well, I have to do these 20 things in order to get to where I want to go. But that can be overwhelming. So just know it's a process, but as long as you remain steadfast, you will get to where you want to go.
I think about, when we talk about, opening up some questions for you, the one
Mhm.
question that I keep thinking about, I'm like, it's always this whole mindset where you're an athlete and you have this humongous ego, and it's true. What do you suggest to athletes who have this ego to say, what, maybe reach out to this person who might be a lot less, or a lot more below what you think they are? Maybe reach out to start making those connections on Instagram and stuff, and even if you have to follow more people, like in the ratio and all this stuff, like what do you say to athletes with these gigantic egos who should be doing these things to build their brand, because once they retire, their brand's going to disappear?
Yeah. I love ego. Ego gets such a negative rap, but there's a difference between, so for me, how I define ego is being confident in myself and the ability to market myself. You have to have an ego in order to market yourself correctly. There's a difference between ego and cockiness. There's that fine line. And I would say try not to be cocky, but you need that ego. And what's interesting is during my dissertation, the people I interviewed, they all revealed in one form or another that they had an ego, because it was the ego that drove them to have the self-confidence and to take that risk and to ask their network for help. And having an ego just means you're really self-confident. And being self-confident is, like I said before, hey, here is why you should hire me. It's because I worked with 10 different languages. I led a championship team. I was able to adapt quickly. In 6 months, I went to a different city to play for a different team. That you need that ego to say, I need to market myself, because I truly believe everyone is a brand. How you talk, how you dress, who you associate with, that is a representation of your brand, how you want to be perceived. And if you don't have that ego to say, hey, you should go talk to that person, or you should try this, you're never going to do it, or it's just going to take you longer to do it than if you're like, you know what, I got this. But there's that fine line of cocky. So let me give you 2 examples. Do we have time for 2
Oh,
examples?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I had been involved for 2 years on the New York, New Jersey Super Bowl in 2014. So I started with them in 2013 and worked through the Super Bowl. I was at an event, a Columbia event. That's where I graduated with my master's. And we were at this event, and one of my professors, he's big in the sports industry. We're in a group, and someone walked up to our group. We didn't know. And she just said, hi, I'm so-and-so. I went, hi, I'm Cheryl. I do sports marketing. And he literally put his hand in my face and went, stop. No, no, no. Who are you? I said, Cheryl Robinson. He goes in, what did you just come off of? And I like, the Super Bowl? He goes, is that a question? I said, no, I came off of the Super Bowl. He goes, that's what you have to lead with. And he goes, sound confident about it. You were involved with it for 2 years. That's huge. And that was a turning moment for me, where I realized leading with that, and especially as women, for any of the women listening, you're always told, don't have the ego, just sort of fly under the radar, right? It's that stigma or that mentality. And I said, no, you know what? If I'm not marketing myself, people don't know who I am. People don't know what I can bring to the table. And that one moment was so defining for me, because I said, I'm not cocky about it. It's just, this is who I am. This is what I offer, and this is what I bring to the table. So I think that's so key to understand, where some people might think, oh, look at her big ego. She's bragging about herself. Bragging about yourself is not having a bad ego. That's just simply like, hey, here's who I am. Because if you don't share, no one is going to know. And then second one is, I was at a networking event, and I said, met this lady, said, oh, I graduated from Columbia. And she went, oh, I graduated from Harvard. I was like, oh, that's great. And then the conversation went to, oh, I just came off of the Super Bowl. She said, oh, I'm involved in the Olympic committee. Now, the outside looking in might think she was trying to one-up me.
Uh-huh.
I didn't take it as a one-up. I took that as her trying to relate to me. So when I said Columbia, she said Harvard, oh, Ivy League. And then when I said the Super Bowl and she said the Olympics, it was like, oh, big sporting events, right? So that's where you have to understand. If she didn't share that with me, I wouldn't have known. Maybe I would have thought she was boring and didn't want to talk to her anymore. So cocky is like interrupting people all the time, or constantly bragging, like constantly, no matter what the subject is, you always find a way back to yourself, into this one big moment in your life. That's cocky. But if you're just sharing what you bring to the table, that's the good ego. That's what you need to drive you to keep going. Does that make sense? I
Absolutely.
know a
I
lot
think
of
it's
people, I get
well,
pushback sometimes.
no, I think it's great because, as an athlete, you're always in those situations where you feel like people are one-upping you because you have such a fine body of work. And it's, well, I was in camp with the Sixers, well, I was in camp with the Bobcats, and I was in camp with the Knicks. And some people will take it as an ego-driven thing, and it becomes like a contest of who's better, as opposed to, like you said, starting to realize this is just a way to make a connection and looking at it more on the connection level, as opposed to because we're competitive. We're all super competitive. So you just want to
Yep.
compete with everyone and be like, well, I'm better than you. And I think that's something that the competitor in us wants to always prove that we're better than people. When you just kind of need to sit back and let people in and explore and let them help you, because one day you're going to be lost without them.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you go in with that mindset of, oh, let me just find out about this person, and they start listing all the teams they've played on, well, maybe there's someone from that team and even the front office that you want to connect with. Oh, now here's my in. Or, hey, I know so and so on that team. And then you develop your relationship based off of your mutual connection and relationship with that other person. And that's where things go better. There are people who are egocentric, 100%. But if you're just enthusiastically sharing with someone and they can see your passion, that's totally different. But I will say, if you are a current player, don't let your ego get in the way of thinking that this is going to be forever and you don't need to do anything now in order to set yourself up for retirement, because you 100% do. I've had conversations with those people as well.
I heard someone once told me when I retired and social media started becoming a thing, and it was starting to take over on Instagram, and you started spending more time on these things thinking that they were great networking. And they said, the amount of time you spend on Instagram, make sure you're spending the equal amount of time on LinkedIn. And I always thought that was so good.
Yeah.
Because I've started following, and there's a lot of pro basketball players who have it. And I started researching, and there's a lot of guys that I know don't. And those are the things that's just kind of just sign up for an account and start hopping on there a little more. Even when you're playing, I get it. Like, there's not you're not gonna have girls or guys show up at your doorstep off LinkedIn, but
Right.
It's like, that's what Instagram and TikTok and all that's for. But LinkedIn is such a valuable tool, and I think that's something that I'm learning so much about it. But that was always a great piece of advice that I always thought was good for the ongoing generation.
Yeah.
So we are at about 34 minutes. The one, and I kind of answered that talking about, I know I had questions about networking and trying to figure out, saying to a young guy who's currently playing overseas, like, how do you build those connections in America instead of just the ones overseas? And that's something, I guess LinkedIn would be something that you could use.
LinkedIn, 100%, and do the virtual coffees or informational interviews, because now with technology, Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp, you're able to connect with those people. So I would say start doing that now, even if you have to stay up a little bit later, just for like 20 or 30 minutes. You don't have to be on the call with them for an hour. At least 15 minutes. That's all you need to establish that connection, and then build from there and send them updates. Hey, my season ended. I'm coming home for a couple of months. Can we meet up for coffee, or could we do another virtual coffee? Something along those lines. And you just need that first connection, that first touch point, to then just continue to build on it.
Well, Dr. Cheryl, this has been awesome. I know, I feel like it's been such a good conversation that we were going to hold a question and answer, but a lot of those questions you were able to kind of answer during our conversation. I think that was incredible. And I think this is just a great tool. And I truly appreciate you coming on today and joining us for the first of our Overseas Famous community hostel, the career building hostel that we are going to be having going forward. And I'm really excited. And we're going to have you back, because right now we had talked about starting to have live people join and ask the guest questions and such. But we're in the beginning stages and trying to figure out schedules and when the best time for people to actually do it live would be. But we really appreciate you and this webinar today, sharing your expertise.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If anyone would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Embrace the Pivot. So feel free to reach out, DM me, and just say, hey, I saw you on the Overseas Famous Career Hostel or Career Building Hostel, however you want to phrase it. But thank you so much. And I'm always up for a part 2.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you hopping on. We appreciate you joining us for this webinar. Hopefully it was informative. We will be having more of these. Check, register for the email chain, which will send out the links to these webinars. And in the future, you'll be able to join us and ask questions to the presenters as well. But we appreciate you guys joining us and building this community through Overseas Famous. Thank you so much.